I never imagined that the person I cared about the most would turn on me just when I needed him most. My name is Sarah, and until 2 years ago, I believed that my life was ideal: a fulfilling career, a devoted husband, and a house we were gradually constructing. But tearing away every delusion you've ever held on to is one of life's favorite things to do. I had been married to Kevin for 5 years. While Kevin worked intermittently at his brother Ryan's construction company, I was the head of marketing for a wedding planning company, earning more than enough to pay for our home. At first, I didn't mind helping us while he found himself. That's what you do as a team, isn't it? However, Kevin's problem was, my spouse had always been second to his mother's son. His mother, Dolores, was the type of lady who could grin and tear you apart. She enjoyed assuming the role of the devoted, kind matriarch in public. But in private, she never had to raise her voice to rip them apart. I initially disregarded the small jabs, the phony smiles, the hushed remarks regarding other female family members. I wanted to think I was unique. Maybe if I put in enough effort, I could win her over. But with ladies like Dolores, nobody ever truly prevails. It began modestly, backhanded praise at family get-togethers. "Oh, Sarah, you're such a hard worker. Must be nice not having to worry about raising kids yet." I didn't mind the first few times. Under the table, Kevin would hold my hand and mutter something along the lines of, "That's just how she is." But after years of trying, Dolores's small jabs had become full-blown contempt by the time I was 6 months pregnant with our first kid. Another girl who thinks she's too good for the stay-at-home life. I turned to face Kevin, pleading with him to speak. He simply lowered his head. On Easter Sunday, everything reached a breaking point. In the corner with Ryan and Kevin, one overheard Dolores giggling and muttering that Janet, the cousin who is a single mother, most likely purchased her new automobile from a buy here, pay here dealership. I got up so quickly that my chair scuffed the wooden floor. "Why do you always have to put people down?" The room fell silent. Dolores's smile remained constant. "If you don't like it, Sarah, you're welcome to leave." I gave Kevin a direct glance. And he remained still, remained silent. At that point, something inside of me broke. After that, I stopped attending family events. I informed Kevin that, while I was pregnant with our child, I could no longer be near her. He didn't dispute. He simply began to spend more and more time away from me at Dolores's house. I kept telling myself that after the kid was born, everything would be great every time he arrived home late, smelling of his mother's perfume and cheap alcohol. Then I received a call. Ryan's getting married. In Hawaii. A wedding at a destination. 5 days. If you were a member of their family, all costs were covered. By that time, I was 8 months pregnant and could hardly walk across the room without having to catch my breath. I didn't think Kevin would even entertain the idea of going. I was mistaken. "It's my brother's wedding, Sarah." "I'm about to give birth, Kevin." As if I were the one acting irrationally, he rubbed the back of his neck. "Dolores says, you'll be fine," Dolores says. With him, it was always that way. 2 days prior to my planned C-section, he departed. He left the room without even turning around. I was by myself the night my water broke. I just about made it to the hospital. My vision had been declining due to pregnancy issues, and the doctors said that if they didn't take quick action, I might lose it altogether. The surgery was touch and go. My son, a small, flawless child who had no idea how alone his mother truly was in my arms when the nurse woke me up. After 4 hours, Kevin arrived. With his arms folded as if the entire situation had annoyed him, he stood at the doorway. He mumbled, "Normal women give birth on their own." After that, I don't think I ever truly loved him. I ought to have left then. But when you have no work and no savings and you're carrying a newborn in your arms, you hold on to the rubble. The fissures continued to widen. Kevin began arriving home at progressively later times. He behaved as though I had ruined his life by giving him a son and that the baby was a burden while he was at home. "All you care about is that kid." I still had stitches in my stomach the night the doctor told me to return to work. He was indifferent. He didn't give a damn. I knew he would leave me if I kept the baby by the time I found out I was pregnant again. Still, I kept her. The fact that karma was already putting everything in action behind the scenes was something I was unaware of and never anticipated. I had given up on Kevin coming home with anything except apathy hanging to him like cheap cologne by the time I was 6 months pregnant with my second child. He slept in Dolores's house more often than in our bed. He would stammer something about running errands for Ryan's wedding or assisting his mom when he finally stumbled through the door, half drunk and smelling of cigarette smoke. Dolores talked about his brother's wedding as if it were some kind of royal coronation, and it had become the center of the universe. I could not sleep without using pillows to support my big tummy, and I could hardly stand without squirming. However, none of that was important. It started with Ryan's wedding. I squinted through my deteriorating vision as I balanced the bills in front of me one cold night while seated at the kitchen table. All the numbers blended together. I was wiping my eyes and putting a shopping bag on the counter when Kevin entered. "What's that?" He hardly looked up. "Clothes for the trip." My chest began to heat up as I blinked. "What trip?" His flat, icy gaze darted toward me. "Ryan's wedding in Hawaii." I chuckled. I was unable to resist. Before I could stop it, a dry, bitter moan forced its way out of my throat. "You're kidding, right? I'm due in 3 weeks." With his arms folded across his chest, he leaned against the refrigerator as if he had done so constantly. "Dolores says you'll be fine. Once more, there it was, Dolores says." I felt like screaming. I wanted to run across the kitchen and grab that shopping bag. However, I simply sat there till my knuckles hurt from my fingers pushing into the table's edge. "What if something happens?" He gave a shrug. "You'll manage. You always do." I'm not sure if it was my heart or the last vestige of respect I still had for him that crumbled more in that moment. I stood in the doorway the night he packed his luggage, one hand on my belly and the other encircling our toddler's tiny, warm fingers. Kevin hardly gave me a look. "I'll be back before the baby comes." Without another look, he left through that door. I refrained from crying. He wasn't urged to stay by me. I bit down on every scream that threatened to burst from my throat as I watched him go. I examined our joint bank account the following day. Empty. All of my savings were gone, including the 2 months' worth of money I had set aside to pay the mortgage and the money for the hospital costs. With one hand on my bulging abdomen, I sat on the couch and gazed at the screen through foggy eyes. He picked up on the final ring when I eventually rang his number. "What?" My chest pounded with my heart. "The money, Kevin. Where is it?" His chuckle was like a knife piercing the line. "We needed it for the wedding gift." "Don't be so greedy, Sarah. Greedy." I was dubbed it by him for wishing to live. Without saying anything else, I hung up. I didn't even bother phoning him that night when the first stinging ache shot through my tummy. I made an ambulance call. My memory of the delivery is limited to brilliant light flashes, nurses rushing quickly, and voices shouting overhead. My baby, tiny, flawless, and utterly oblivious to the fact that her father hadn't even bothered to call, was sleeping next to me in a plastic bassinet when I woke up. It took 3 days for Kevin to appear. His arms were crossed as he stood in the doorway, his gaze darting to the infant, as if she were something he had unintentionally left behind. "You should have called me." I gazed at him, feeling lonely and empty. "You were in Hawaii." He grinned. "Yeah. Best trip of my life." I made the decision then and there that I would never again beg this man for anything. Kevin took the bedroom while I went home with my babies and slept on the couch. While hubby slept in until noon and griped about supper being late, I nursed, changed diapers, and somehow managed to keep the house from falling apart around me. The infant would pull a pillow over his head when he sobbed at night. "Can't you shut her up?" I can't remember how many times I sat by myself in the dark, holding my daughter as my son slept soundly on the couch next to me. Tears were streaming down my cheeks as I whispered promises into their tiny ears. "He's hurting me, and I'll never allow someone to do the same to you." My eyesight was failing, so I was working 8-hour shifts while pumping breast milk in a small supply closet during my breaks by the time my baby was 6 months old. Kevin was hardly aware, until the day I got home early from work and discovered him in the kitchen, whispering on the phone. Dolores and Ryan were his entire universe. "Just keep it between us. She'll never know." When he noticed me, he quickly hung up and tucked the phone in his pocket. I remained silent. I simply stood there and gazed at the man I used to adore, and recognizing that I knew nothing about him. That night, a tiny, steady, dark thing coiled inside me, hungry, It spoke things I had never before allowed myself to think. You are more powerful than he, more intelligent, better. Allow him to dig his own grave. Let the cords be pulled by Dolores. I'd hold off. I would observe. And when they did fall at last, the knife would be in my hand. Something in me changed after that night. I gave up pleading with Kevin to get home early. I no longer begged him to spend time with our son or hold the infant. I was no longer in need of him. Rather, I sat quietly and patiently as the flaws in his idyllic little universe began to break. When his phone chimed late at night and he whispered in the hallway with the door half closed, Kevin assumed I was too exhausted to notice. The way he and Dolores gathered together during family get-togethers, their voices low and their glances at me as if I were some piece of furniture they had forgotten how to discard, made him believe that I was literally blind. But I saw it all. Kevin's animosity was thick, stale, and hard to get rid of by the time my daughter was a year old. It hung in the house like cigarette smoke. I can't do everything, Sarah. Every time I asked him to get groceries or keep the kid for 5 freaking minutes, he would hiss it through tight teeth. Everything. As if I hadn't woken up at 3 in the morning. As if my eyesight weren't fading and I weren't working a full shift every day. I said nothing. Since I was aware of, karma had already arrived. Little things like Kevin misplacing his keys, skipping appointments, and neglecting to pay the water bill were the first signs. Then the larger fissures showed up. He was pacing the kitchen one afternoon, looking through papers, perspiration trickling down his brow. He yelled at me like a hound in a corner when I asked him what was wrong. None of your business. However, I was already aware. Behind everyone's back, Dolores had mortgaged her home, the same one she had boasted about for years. The Hawaii wedding? The presents? Their new business partners and Ryan's endless evenings out? It was all financed by loans they would never be able to pay back. My role was flawless. I nodded in agreement whenever Kevin complained about how money's tight or how Dolores was handling things. Our pantry shelves began to appear more bare, but I tried not to notice. But at night, I was sneaking stealthily behind Kevin's back while he slept on the couch. I created a bank account for myself. I began setting aside as much money as I could from my paychecks for savings. In order to create a small buffer for myself and the children, I called my previous employer and arranged freelance marketing jobs under a fictitious identity. I was about to walk away from him. Well, he failed to notice it since he was too busy ruining himself. When Thanksgiving finally arrived, Kevin was hardly returning home. That year, I prepared supper by myself while my daughter slept in her crib, and my son watched cartoons in the living room. When I laid the table for 3, I had to bite my lip to contain my tears. Around midnight, Kevin finally staggered in the door, smelling strongly of cigarettes and intoxicated. He hardly gave the cold plates that were still out a glance. He muttered, "What? You should have eaten without me." I truly looked at him, and what I had been too scared to see for years was right there in front of me. He was little, feeble, a pitiful little man. He felt strong only when Dolores held his leash. On that night, I didn't cry. I simply cleaned the dishes and stored the leftovers. I began mentally preparing my escape strategy. I heard Kevin on the phone the following morning, his voice low and frantic. Just one more loan. She's never going to find out. As I rocked the infant in my arms, I grinned to myself. Give him time to dig. Allow him to drown. I saved up enough money by Christmas to get a divorce. I was simply waiting for karma to hit first, for the appropriate time. It took very little time. The unraveling began slowly, as most downfalls do. This is a rumor. There was a late payment. When I opened Facebook one chilly January morning, I saw Dolores sharing mysterious Bible sayings about betrayal and false friends. The murmurs were all over by February. It was all smoke and mirrors, Ryan's financial company that Dolores had been boasting about for months. They had lost their money. The residence was foreclosed. All of the money they had invested in those covert accounts had vanished along with Ryan's wife, Tiffany. It was a fraud. Everything. Dolores's home was sold at a bank auction in March, leaving it unoccupied. Ryan was holed up in a motel on the outskirts of town. Kevin, too? Expecting me to answer the door as if nothing had occurred, Kevin crawled home with his tail between his legs. I nearly burst out laughing at him. You always manage, Sarah. He had told me that prior to abandoning us. He was correct. I had succeeded. Not with him. I served him the divorce papers without even raising my voice. With firm hands and a racing heart, I simply slid the envelope over the table. What's this? My freedom. He initially attempted to argue with me, blaming me and acting like the victim. However, I had been observing him for the past 2 years. I was well aware of how to outlive him. Kevin appeared to have aged 10 years by the time the judge decided in my favor. His face was sunken and his hair was thinner. The home? Mine. The children? Mine. He spent all of his savings on Ryan's wedding. He had to reimburse every last dime. I didn't raise my voice. I never engaged in dirty play. I simply waited, because karma is inevitable. When I last saw him, he was waiting for Dolores to come get him like a forlorn little child, smoking a cigarette outside the courthouse in the rain. With my head held high and my babies bundled in the stroller, I strolled right by him without a word. For retribution, some people wait their entire lives. The best type, though? The sweetest tasting kind? Is the one that requires no effort on your part. You simply allow them to decay. I had never experienced freedom so strongly. It wasn't ostentatious or noisy. I didn't hurl dishes against the wall or yell at Kevin in a dramatic moment. There was silence, like the first breath after too much time submerged. The frost pierced my cheeks as I waited outside the courthouse on the day the divorce was finalized, my babies enveloped in heavy winter coats. Behind me, Kevin lingered on the steps, rain seeping through his jacket and a cigarette dangling between his fingers. I didn't even turn around. With my head held high and everything I had ever battled for in my arms, I walked to the bus station. My kids, my life, myself. I shut myself in the small spare bedroom at my parents' house after putting both of the kids to bed that evening. I traced the thin wrinkles around my weary eyes as I gazed at my image in the broken mirror. I had made it through. However, living is not the same as surviving. I had spent so many years stifling my emotions, apologizing for taking up space, avoiding Kevin's mood swings, and swallowing my rage whenever Dolores spoke. There was just one person left to defend. Me. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table the following morning after waking up before the sun rose. For months, I had been working side jobs, doing little freelance marketing assignments under fictitious names, saving every dime in a secret account that Kevin was unaware of. Freedom wasn't all I wanted. I desired authority. I had been creating something while Kevin had been digging his own grave. A tiny online store. Handcrafted home products such as bamboo utensils, linen napkins, and ceramic mugs. Easy, tidy, mine. At first, orders came very slowly, maybe 5 or 10 per week. But I put every penny back into the company, researching suppliers and studying marketing tactics. Long after the kids had gone to sleep. By spring, I was making more money than Kevin ever had from that small side gig. I didn't even tell my parents about my success. I wanted to make all of the money myself. However, I could sense something ravenous and dangerous churning deep in my chest the entire time. I desired for them to witness my ascent. I wanted their own underestimation to suffocate them. The rumors were widely circulated by the time summer arrived. The house of Dolores has vanished. Ryan was lounging on the couch, living on handouts, begging for rides, and doing temporary jobs. Kevin had moved into a dilapidated apartment on the opposite side of town. I could have been of assistance. He had denied me the same mercy that I could have given him. However, I didn't. Karma doesn't come easily. It's a reckoning. My phone chimed one slick August day. An unknown number. I responded without giving it any thought. Sarah? That voice, thin and brittle and full of practiced sweetness, is one I would have recognized anywhere. Dolores. I briefly closed my eyes and let her words transport me back to every Thanksgiving meal, every slur that was whispered, and every back of my back look that she and Kevin had shared. We need your help. It nearly made me chuckle. I was referred to as a burden by the same woman, the same mother who danced at her son's wedding and urged Kevin to leave me alone when she was 9 months pregnant, the same woman who had abandoned me and taken the last of my savings. She wanted my assistance now, she continued. The children need their father, in a voice that cracked. The kids. All her life, she had hardly looked at them. With my hair tied up, black circles under my eyes, and a body still soft from childbirth, I leaned against the wall and gazed at my reflection in the window, a woman they had thrown out. They had underestimated a lady. I inhaled deeply, relishing the weight of her despair. "I'm sorry you're struggling, Dolores." On the other end of the telephone, her breath caught. Her mind was racing, trying to find the ideal angle, the manipulation she had mastered over decades, and I could almost feel it. "Sarah, we're family." I grinned till my cheeks hurt. "You weren't concerned about family when you left me alone, bleeding in a hospital bed." Quiet. "You weren't concerned about family when you stole from me." She began to breathe more rapidly. Through the crevices, I could hear her panic. "I didn't know you knew exactly what you were doing." I could have pulled her through every injury, every restless night, and every insult that was whispered. I didn't have to, though. She was aware already. "Don't call me again." I ended the call. I blocked her number after that. After that, I spent a considerable amount of time sitting at the table and gazing at my phone. I had been dreaming about this moment for years, mentally rehearsing the ideal monologue in 100 different ways. Ultimately, though, I didn't require the speech. I didn't have to shatter them. They were broken. I returned to packing orders, hand-wrapping each linen napkin and bamboo spoon. Something inside of me seemed like it was piecing itself back together with each box I sealed. The store was making 5 figures a month by the fall. I was negotiating a lease for my own small shop by winter. Immediately following the holidays, Kevin made one call. I let the voicemail go. He asked if he could come see the children in a weak voice, and I only heard the message once. I didn't respond and erased it. By the time spring returned, I was standing behind my own store counter, with my name displayed across the window in gold lettering, when I noticed an item on my phone. "Former banker Ryan Anderson sentenced for wire fraud." Everything had been lost for Dolores. Ryan was going to jail. Kevin was performing illegal jobs to pay his rent while living in a basement apartment. The weight of what they had done pressed against my chest as I gazed at the headline for a long time. After that, I brushed off the counter and locked my phone, and resumed their job. Watching them fall isn't the finest kind of retaliation. It's very tall compared to them. Even where you went is hidden from them. I hardly gave Kevin any thought by the time spring turned into summer. On most days, I got up early, prepared breakfast for the children, and then went down to my store, which was a little storefront. Warmed by the morning sun, the sign over the door read "Willow and Hearth" in gold lettering. I didn't get it from anyone. The path was not cleared by anyone. While Ryan was playing king in a cardboard castle, Dolores was honing her tongue behind my back, and Kevin was using stolen money to buy plane tickets and bottle service. I built every inch of it from the ground up. They had reduced to whispers. It was I who made it out alive. Customers would occasionally bring up the Andersons in casual conversation, how Kevin was still jumping from job to job, how Dolores was working the register at a nearby grocery shop, or how Ryan was facing jail time. I would nod in agreement, smile nicely, and then bury the anecdotes under inventory lists and spreadsheets. They were artifacts, and dead things were useless to me. After the kids went to bed, I got myself a glass of wine and sat on the veranda the night I reached my sales milestone of $100. Oh. In the back of my mind, I could still hear Kevin's dismissive, condescending voice. "You're just a housewife. You don't inspire people. You'll never make it without me." Lifting my drink, I looked up at the vacant night sky. Observe me. Living well is usually said to be the best kind of retaliation. That's not exactly correct, though. Being untouchable is the best kind of retaliation. Dolores's number was never unblocked by me. I didn't respond to Kevin's mails. I didn't turn around. By summer's end, Willow and Hearth had expanded to a second location. By Christmas, I had added handmade furniture and home decor to the product line and hired 3 full-time staff members. Until I discreetly requested full custody and had his parental rights revoked, Kevin's name was never mentioned again. He never even came to oppose it. I never shared the whole tale with my kids. Perhaps when they're older, I'll tell them how I nearly lost everything and how I fought my way out while their father destroyed his own life. For the time being, however, they only needed to know that their mother had constructed a kingdom out of debris. Women can break, others get sharper. I left Kevin, Dolores, and every nasty remark behind my back because I at last understood. I never belonged to the group. One was destined to rise. Kevin was resting against the wall outside the grocery store, with a cigarette hanging between his fingers. The last time I saw him, he had less hair. On his body, his clothing hung loosely. I was simply another stranger in the crowd, and he didn't notice me. For a moment, I watched him through the glass as I stood there. Then I turned to leave. He had waited for the world to give him something all his life. Without his help, I had constructed everything he had ever desired using my own hands. I was referred to as weak. I was referred to as tiny. However, I was the one who ultimately left unharmed. Never needing them again is the best kind of retaliation.